Class is now in session. I'm Professor Hockey, and today we will be recapping the Sharks 2019 draft. So, of course, every team for every draft class is given 7 draft picks, 1 in every round. So, for the Sharks, if they hadn't traded any away, if they hadn't acquired any, they for this draft would have had the 29th overall pick, the 60th, the 91st, the 122nd, the 153rd, the 184th, and the 215th pick. Now, of course, as with basically every team, there's always a trade for a draft pick. There's always an acquisition of a draft pick. And so, start of Friday, the Sharks actually only had the 41st, which was acquired from the Philadelphia Flyers in the Justin Braun trade, and then their 91st, their 153rd, their 184th, and their 215th. So basically a second round pick from the Flyers, and then their 3rd, 5th, 6th, and 7th. This is because their first round pick was traded to the Buffalo Sabres in the Evander Kane trade, along with their 4th round pick, so the 29th overall and the 122nd overall, and their 60th overall, their second rounder, was traded to the Detroit Red Wings in the Gustav Nyquist trade. So they only had 5 draft picks to start the day. However, through some wheeling and dealing done by Doug Wilson, as he does basically every single draft day, the Sharks actually ended up making the 48th overall and the 55th overall, which are 2 second rounders, then the 108th overall, which was a 4th rounder, and then 164th and 184th, both 6th rounders. So basically, the Sharks went from having a 2nd, a 3rd, a 5th, a 6th, and a 7th to 2 seconds, a 4th, and 2 6ths through the following 6 trades. The Sharks gave away their 41st overall from the Flyers to the Golden Knights, if I'm not mistaken, for the 48th and the 82nd. Then they traded that 82nd and the 91st after they used the 48th for the 55th. That gave them their second round pick. They then traded a 4th round pick in 2020, so next year, for the 108th round pick, overall pick. They then traded Francis Perron from their AHL team, a player who, it's not really a big loss. I mean, by December, it was looking like he might be something, but by the end of the season, I'm sure most people realized, and of course Doug Wilson shows here that he realized that Perron would likely not be nothing more than an AHL player, so certainly not a big loss to trade him away. He was traded away with the 215th overall for Tom Pyatt, basically just a moving contract. He's a UFA at the end of this year, so he will not be back. And then the 164th overall pick, the Sharks also traded their 153rd for a 211th plus a 7th rounder in 2020. They then traded that 211th for a 7th rounder in 2020. So looking at next year's draft, they're down a 4th rounder, but they, I believe they do have 2 extra 7th rounders, which I guess is nice to see. So some solid moves from Doug Wilson, and they started on Friday with 5 draft picks. They ended up only drafting 5 times, but did a bit better than what you would expect coming in. So with their first pick in this draft at 48th overall, they drafted Artemiy Knyazev, a Russian from the QMJHL, a defenseman, and the early scouting report here on him is that he plays a very aggressive game, sort of like an Erik Karlsson style, where he's a very smooth skater, plays an aggressive style of game, isn't necessarily bad defensively, but when I say he plays aggressive, he certainly plays aggressive, tries to step up in the neutral zone and things like that, so he'll sometimes get burned with players being able to get by him, especially in juniors where there's a lot of skilled players. I'm sure that's something that actually happened a decent amount, which is potentially why he dropped to the 2nd round. So if there is something for him to work on, it would be trying to maybe keep it a bit more controlled when he's able to aggressively step up to make those defensive plays. I do find it interesting that Doug Wilson would decide to go for another offensively minded defenseman because, of course, they already have Burns and Karlsson. Their top prospect is Ryan Merkley, another offensively minded defenseman, a very offensively minded defenseman. So the fact that they get yet another one is a bit strange to me, especially since, let's say, a couple years down the line, if Merkley is able to make the squad by then and maybe Knyazev is close, if not there, the Sharks could be running Burns, Karlsson, Merkley, and Knyazev. Even if you say maybe Burns is gone because he's a lot older by then, like 36, you're still running with 3 really heavily offensive-minded defensemen, as it seems. So it does seem a bit of an odd choice, but we'll see if the Sharks' Russian scouts, as they ended up picking 3 Russians in their 5 picks, end up working out here. Then, just 7th picks later, at 55th, they ended up drafting Dylan Hamaliuk, a left winger, also 18 years of age, and he's more of a prototypical power forward, very similar to, Tomas Hertl style of game. His draft comparable when he was drafted was said to be Blake Wheeler, that he sort of plays like that. Apparently he's a very aggressive player. He's a big guy. I believe he's like 6'3", so he goes in on the forecheck, plays very Hertl-like, where he tries to win battles along the wall. He's not the most skilled player, which is why he ends up dropping to the second round instead of being in the first round like Hertl or Meyer. But, he works hard, potentially could be, let's say, a second liner in the future if everything works out for him. So not a terrible pick, and also a pick that we know Doug Wilson likes. He loves those power forwards because they usually have a higher skill floor than, let's say, a very skilled player. Next, at 108th overall would be Yegor Spiridonov, I believe, something like that. Also a Russian, as you could probably tell. He is a two-way centerman, so more of a penalty-killing kind of guy. He has got some decent skill, nothing really high ceiling or anything like that. Probably would be potentially like a third-line center in the NHL, maybe second-line center if you're lucky. If everything works out, of course, for him, probably more likely as a fourth rounder that nothing comes of it, but still got to keep up the hope there. So apparently does a pretty good job. He played in the KHL Junior League, so the MHL is what it's called. Did pretty good job there. Drove his own line apparently. So all in all, pretty decent pick for the Sharks. Also one that is a bit more of a safe one. You could technically see him working out. One who's not really a safe pick and is a bit more of a gamble would be their next pick at 164th, which would be Timur Ibragimov, if I'm getting that correct. He is a left winger, and he gets very sort of Nikolai Goldobin vibes, a Russian, more of a skilled Russian, very focused on his offensive game, and he does that quite well. He's got some decent speed, a very good shot, but the main issues here would be with his defensive game. He doesn't seem very committed to the defensive games, and that could be the issue here. That's likely why he fell all the way to the 6th round. So this is definitely a gamble. Maybe 99 times out of 100, this guy never even makes it close to the NHL, but maybe you get lucky and he actually does work on the defensive game. He's got the drive to really, really improve his game and his all-around game, and maybe you actually have a diamond in the rough here. It's a long shot, but might as well go for the bet. Finally, another pretty safe pick. The Sharks end up with defenseman Santeri Hatakka from Finland at the 184th overall pick. A bit of a two-way defender, but he doesn't really have that high of a ceiling, isn't said to be that skilled, and so, of course, in the 6th round, you're not really expecting much out of the players you do pick. I don't know if Hatakka has that much potential. He was with the under-20 squad for Finland. I believe he was in the Five Nations tournament that was also had. He was on a Jokerit squad that was okay. He was a decent defenseman there, but there isn't really much to say about him. There isn't much of a ceiling for Hatakka. So again, you're hoping, but I don't know if anything is going to come from this. So basically, in the end, the players you are looking at are likely the first two, obviously the second rounders, and then maybe you can keep an eye on Ibragimov in the 6th round if you really want to keep track of that, because maybe he could potentially be a diamond in the rough. As I said, Yegor Spiridonov in the 108th overall, potential to be a decent forward, but you're mostly looking at that 48th, probably the 55th, and potentially the 164th overall picks here for the Sharks. So all in all, decent draft day. Doug Wilson does what he does best. Wheels and deals, gets some improved draft picks, and ends up making it a decent day for the Sharks, all things considered. Class dismissed.